Having said that, nuance, context, edge cases, those are still hard in medicine for AI. So I don't think it's replacing clinical judgment anytime soon.
Dr. Bhatt, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at the American College of Cardiology.
When we should use it or not use it is our responsibility. And when it gives you an output, the likelihood that it is 100% right is almost zero, right? It won't always be right.
Where AI can potentially have the most transformative effect.
I think the administrative side of medicine, 100%. The back office work is stuff that can be, automated. And I think AI has the opportunity to help us upskill people. The compute power of the human brain is not enough to deliver the best healthcare in the complex systems we have. We need the compute power of AI. So desperation is the mother of adoption.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Chief AI Officer. Today, I'm really excited to bring you Dr. Bhatt, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at the American College of Cardiology. Ami, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, before we get into our questions related to AI and healthcare and cardiology in particular, can you give our listeners just a quick introduction to yourself and your career path so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So, originally a Yankees fan, then became a Red Sox fan. I just like to get that out of the way right up front. From New York up to Boston, have been here in Boston in the Harvard Mass General Brigham system since 2001 as a cardiologist. Started by taking care of adults with congenital heart disease. So when kids were born with heart disease, they didn't used to live very long, and then they started to. And my career was blossoming at the same time that these kids were becoming adults. And I always say that's the reason I ended up in digital health and then eventually AI, because they would demand that I keep up with the pace of technology that they were using in the rest of life. And so even if healthcare wasn't catching up, they wanted me to. And so it's really thanks to them that I started thinking about telemedicine, digital health, and now obviously thinking about AI and how it can help us. So that's who I am. 2 teenage daughters, one's 12, one's 18. They also keep me in check. So if you see humility, you can thank them for that.
Well, I'm sure you've had to deal with many things as a result of your switch from New York to Boston as far as baseball. So I'll let that one lie very quickly and get straight into some of our topics today. One thing that I've heard you talk a lot about is this idea of AI collaborating more with clinicians rather than replacing them. It's a common theme that we see in the industry about, those who want to fully automate away jobs or those that see more of a augmentation or a collaboration type of perspective. What's your take on that, and how did you get to that place?
Yeah, so I think the statement is true that AI is not going to replace us by and large for a majority of things. And it's definitely true in healthcare. The idea behind collaborative intelligence, and one of my good friends was president of the American Medical Association, and Jesse used to say augmented intelligence. And the reason I prefer collaborative, and I've told him this on stage before, so this is not talking out of turn, but is that there's one thing to seek assistance from compute power. There's another thing to understand that how that computing algorithm is designed is partly our responsibility. When we should use it or not use it is our responsibility. And when it gives you an output, the likelihood that it is 100% right is almost zero, right? It won't always be right. And so iterating on that is also our responsibility. And so when I started talking about collaborative intelligence, it was because I had a feeling that as we were talking about AI, people were either understanding that, it might replace my job, I don't want to use it, and not using it's not the answer. Or I'm going to use it and it's going to help me. And the answer is, you probably need to design it, practice using it, and then iterate on it. And if you do that, then it may help you and your patient. But if you don't, it's not necessarily going to be just helpful out of the box. And I think that was new for us. If you have a new valve or a new prosthetic, it works out of the box. You expect it to work out of the box. And with AI, it's just not going to. The circumstance in which you place it requires you to tinker with it. And I think that was new for the field of medicine.
I love that nuance. I want to dig into it a little bit more because I think it's an important nuance. So the just the terminology, you felt like augment kind of assumes that this will immediately augment you and you don't even have to worry about the limitations of the technology or the context. And so you feel like Collaborate sets us up for success, probably also in areas outside of medicine, I would assume. That's a good concept to take to
I
any
would think
industry.
so. Yeah, I would think so.
And so I think that displacement narrative is often seen in the press across a lot of different industries. Do you see that as creating a barrier to adoption in healthcare in particular and how clinicians interact with it? Or what has been your experience so far in the field?
Yeah, this actually echoes how I started with my patients, right? Which is when AI first came onto the field for medicine, people said, no, we don't want something that replaces us. And then now, if you think about just in an average clinician's daily life, how much they rely, especially with the advent of generative AI, right? On generative AI, now they're getting comfortable with AI in all aspects of life. And now you see, okay, well, what exactly would it do for me here? How does it work? And so I think there is some more acceptance now that AI is everywhere. It's in every field, and we can probably have it in medicine to a certain extent in certain areas. I do think in the beginning, it was a major barrier to adoption, the thought that a computer could never do what a human does. Now, having said that, nuance, context, edge cases, those are still hard in medicine for AI. Maybe sometimes things will get it right. You really have to work to set up both the actual either LLM or smaller language model with RAG or whatever you're doing. You have to work to set it up right. And then you have to be really aware of it and iterate on it to make it right, to be able to catch context, nuance, and edge cases. And if you don't do that, again, the out of the box is going to miss that. So I don't think it's replacing clinical judgment anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's something that there's in healthcare in particular. I know that there is a lot of hype and desire to go after the diagnostic tools, the clinical judgments. Whereas I had someone on the show recently from the chief AI officer of the Path Foundation, Bilal Mateen, talking about how often some of the most transformative work in healthcare can go with AI implementations as basic as like clinical, like patient records, helping to clean up CRMs. Like some of the more boring things actually have a massive impact on the healthcare system. But we always chase kind of the shiny diagnostic tools.
That's exactly right. Because, I think the administrative side of medicine, 100%. The back office work is stuff that can be, automated, used with algorithms, and then AI. It's almost it's a trajectory. It's not all actually AI that we're implementing, but it's allowing us to do more algorithmic work. The one other place I want to mention, though, is clinicians have a lot of work that is not just talking to a patient. And so that's one place, right, where the effort that goes into the practice of medicine, that's not the kind of brain power. I think that's another area where clinicians have been really increasingly willing to adopt generative AI. So things like voice to text, where your note is being written and I have eye contact with you rather than like this thing where nobody wants to see this, right? And so I think those are some areas where we're definitely seeing increased adoption for the reasons you just said, Ben, from your last conversation.
And so you mentioned kind of the nuance around context and edge cases and how clinicians should approach that. Can you provide some examples of where you see, you just provided one. Are there any other examples where you see like very rapid adoption and other ones where you would tell people to maybe pump the brakes a little bit and think through how you're implementing this or some of the consequences?
Yeah, I would maybe take one step back and remind us that generative AI is not all of AI right now. And so the machine learning side of things, both supervised and unsupervised, have been around in medicine for a while. Radiology gets full credit for going first, image interpretation. And so that's an area where we haven't really even asked people per se, can you use this? Instead, we've said, hey, this CAT scan was done, and here's the pre-read. And in fact, the pre-read is machine learning, doing analyses and helping you understand what these things could be. And so I think that's an area where it's a great example of sometimes the AI doesn't have to be something you elect to use. It can be something that just gives you the information you might need at the minute you need it. And so imaging is a great place for that example. The next place that we need to figure out how to do is if I'm seeing you, Ben, as a patient, you have a lot of information. There's social determinants about you and drivers of your health. There's your own health records, which by and large are electronic. Not everywhere, even in this country, they all electronic, but by and large. And then you might have wearables, right? For cardiologists, there's a lot of wearable data coming in oftentimes. It's hard for me as a human in my brain to be able to, in 20 minutes, get all that information from you, first of all, put it together, and then make like the best decision I can for you. And so those are places where information gathering and presentation to the clinical team, that's an area people really want and we're trying to build. Part of the problem is all of that data comes in different forms and different places and isn't always easy accessible. And so that's a little bit slow, but I think it might be the next area. But right now, imaging reports, absolutely. Administrative back office, prior auths. Why am I on the phone doing things when, the ChatGPT can tell me what to say and then just say it to somebody? And so I think a lot of the administrative and the workforce burden or effort, those are the areas we're seeing it. But there's an appetite for not making the clinical decisions and the shiny star, but at least get me the information in a better way. And we think that AI can do that and compute power can do that. But our data's a little messy still.
Yeah, you bring up a point that comes up a lot on this show, which is there are a lot of forms of AI, and generative AI tends to take up everyone's brain space when they think about AI today. But obviously, machine learning, to your point, like image recognition, all of those things have been around for a long time, adding a lot of value.
Mm-hmm.
On the generative side, obviously, that's, to your point, that's one of the most exciting opportunities in terms of transforming all that unstructured data or differently formatted data into like one system. I think there are a lot of opportunities there. There are also risks associated with that, I think, particularly in the healthcare space.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help physicians, clinicians, like the leadership teams at large healthcare organizations think through that in order to make the right decisions when it comes to deploying AI?
Yeah, I was Northwell in New York leads a really great constellation forum every year, and I had the privilege of being in this year. I was talking to some of the docs there, talking to some docs in Allegheny next week, and they're all in different places with different styles of care. However, the one shared experience is, where are you going to start? And risk stratification is the first thing that comes up. So I chair the FDA's Digital Health Advisory Committee. I'm not speaking on behalf of the FDA, but one of the first things that came up when we were talking about mental digital health kind of chatbots was, how do you risk stratify? And so everywhere you are, the first conversation you have when you're talking about healthcare is risk stratification. What are the lowest risk areas where you can start? Now, the problem is, if you start in a low risk area and you pilot, there is maybe not the academic impetus, the healthcare outcome impetus, or the fiscal impetus to take that any further. And so then we say death by 1,000 pilots, and it's because we picked a low risk area that kind of nobody cares about. And so now we are changing the conversation to, what are the lower risk areas that are a real problem? And this is where I think AI is bringing medical care and population health finally closer together. So we've been kind of two different industries for a long time. And finally, I think because of technology, we are merging. So I'll give you my favorite example, which is hypertension. 1 out of 2 people listening to this podcast right now have high blood pressure. 60% of those people don't know it. There are lots of ways to check your blood pressure. They're increasing things that are not just the cuff. We're going to have wrist things. There's going to be. If we think about that population, when you just develop hypertension or you have that first disease, you're a pretty low risk patient. It's something new. You don't have a lot of other things going on. But the impact is so high in the short and long term if you start treating blood pressure earlier, right? Those are the examples, and they exist in every field. I'm just telling you my field. They exist everywhere in medicine where, yes, there's a low risk patient now who is going to be a high risk patient, and that can be a high fiscal risk, an outcome risk, whatever you want. And I think if we start there now, that's one of the best places where we can achieve scale. I don't think we should pilot if we don't think scale is achievable. There's some learnings, but by and large, we should really pick the places that are going to have impact.
Yeah, I love that because, again, so many applications also outside of the field of medicine in terms of death by 1,000 pilots, and often the mismatch that happens between chasing the thing that you can do technically, or that's like exciting technically to do, but doesn't really deliver business value, or choosing something so constrained that ultimately the leadership within the team doesn't care about it. And so that's, interesting to see how you find that sweet spot. As you know, once a decision is made, do you see any common mistakes that come up again and again as that rollout is happening?
It's the lack of infrastructure, and it's everywhere in every field, right? You say we're going to use this, we're going to buy this, it's going to provide this information. And the problem is you have it, when I was younger, we used to do a lot of design thinking in medicine. We would do patient journey maps. Where does a patient start? Where do they go next? What happens next? And we're not actually doing that with the AI right now the way we should be. So we say, oh, we're designing for AI, but we're not taking the where will it affect each person? So I'll give you a story. When I first started doing telemedicine, patients really liked it. And then all of a sudden, I didn't have as many patient visits and I couldn't understand. And one day I overheard an admin from my office on the phone. She said, well, Dr. Bhatt can't see you in person, but I guess if you want to do a televisit, you could. And I was thinking, nobody gave a script to the admin. We didn't think of sitting with our administrative assistant who's the front door to the office and saying, hey, this is why this is important. And so the approach that my admin had was whatever her experience with the world was, which at that point was not telemedicine. This is long before COVID. So in that sense, I think you really have to think about who are all the different players that are going to touch it, and how is that going to happen? And so that's part infrastructure, is a communication infrastructure. Why are we doing it? And what is your role in it? How does it affect you? So that has to be done. That is a campaign. That is not just communication. That is a campaign to get people on board, and it has to happen. And then there's the physical infrastructure. I'll take Apple Watch as an example. Everywhere I've been going, people say, hey, Dr. Bhatt, what are we doing about wearables? My patients send in Apple Watch tracings, and they're either printouts or they're scanned in or they bring them into the office. And I don't know what to do with it. And by the way, I'm worried that I'm responsible for it. What if there's something in there that I'm missing? And so we actually at the ACC, we partnered with Apple and we created an Apple Watch guide. And it is long, but in it are different sections of how do you bring data in? What do you say to your patient? What do you tell your patient this can't be used for? Do you need to know the research behind it to believe and trust it? Here's the research for it. And so you have to go through all of that. And now when people are using this, they're able to say, okay, if you want to bring me your Apple Watch data, here's the stuff I need. Here's how you should print it out. Here's how we're going to upload it. And all of a sudden, we've created a technical infrastructure. Here's a nurse who's going to oversee all of this. And when things seem out of sorts, that's when it's going to be alerted to the clinician for the clinician-patient interaction. And so all of this is really important, the physical technical infrastructure, and then the communications campaign infrastructure to get people on board.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've mentioned wearables a couple times, and obviously the potential for AI to handle the vast quantities of data that'll be generated as a result of that. Do you see that as helping to shift healthcare organizations from more kind of episodic care models to something that is like continuous patient monitoring? And what do you think the impact will be for both patients and the organizations that are supporting them?
Yeah. And I mean, checking your blood pressure twice a year at a doctor's office is not healthcare, right? We have to just admit that. It's what we did for a long time. It is not healthcare, right? So, and I can say that about I can pick just about anything and tell you that what we do currently does not seem like good healthcare because continuous monitoring is possible. So people often talk about the last mile, which is like when you get out of the hospital, out of the clinic into the patient. And my favorite phrase really is that's the first mile. The patient is where the health is starting. And so we have this idea that patients can't monitor themselves and you have to be prescribed things. And whereas for really complicated disease, that may be true for the majority of patients, which is all of us, right, as individuals in the home, there's nothing wrong with us starting to measure things about ourselves and understand how our bodies work. And so there's a frame shift that I'm really pushing. The phrase I use is it's not consumerism, it's patient agency. And so let people measure things, let them learn about themselves, give them constructs that they want to share that information with you. It doesn't seem like a burden, but it seems like an opportunity. So I think that first mile of healthcare and people really being much more interested in their own health is elevating kind of the base of population health right now. And what we have to do in healthcare is stop being hospital-based, clinic-based. We now have a lot more remote monitoring, but close that final gap between I'm measuring myself and you prescribe me something to measure. And that's my area of interest right now. And I hope to close that in the next 3 years is how do we have a clear process by which we understand what can you do on your own and what do you need a clinician to manage with you and what happens right in between there. And we have a workforce shortage, so it's hard to close that gap because that type of monitoring and disease doesn't seem to attract the same attention as the really sick patient still. And so that's an issue we have in a capitalistic market. If we get to value-based care, right? But that's happening today. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. That will happen slowly over time and will require a lot of people to be on board.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting shift that would have a radical outcome on the healthcare system, right? Because the reality is most people are not in severe, like critical illness, but there's so many downstream effects of not doing that preventative work, of not doing that monitoring. I'm like someone just personally, I totally see the benefits of preventative care. I'm still, even though I'm deep into technology, there's just something about giving a third party like that, like access to like my most critical biometric data that still weirds me out. And I see the value. Like, how are you, what are the campaigns that are running right now? How do you get clinicians and patients and kind of like everybody bought into the value of that? And then to your point about the gap, like, how do we close that gap? What is value-based care for you, and what will it actually deliver for us?
I don't know if you remember, about maybe 12 to 18 months ago, I could be off in my timing, there were some really large billboards up and down the East Coast that I was noticing. And I think maybe it was an iPhone. I don't remember which version iPhone. And it basically said something to the effect of like, your privacy matters. And now that's not the right campaign, but that was the gist I got from driving on Route 95 up and down the East Coast and seeing these, right? I would never tell my patients that they should go out there and wear a wearable or use things where they're uncomfortable giving their private data out, because I think there are really good companies that are trying very hard to preserve privacy. There are also people, and we won't get into politics, inside our systems everywhere all the time. So I never prescribe things and say you have to give your data away. It is a personal choice. For all of us who watch Netflix incessantly and have 70 million passwords on our phone, and maybe half our passwords are the same, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, well, my life is out there anyway. And so for those people, I say, if you are using it, then let's learn how to use it proactively for ourselves. Let's understand what that data is. Feel free to talk to me about it. I'll talk with you about it. But here are the guardrails of how we're going to talk about that together to make it a productive conversation. Because there is a lot of real disease out there that still needs to be treated. I want to pause and take that to one other thing, which is in between us as individuals and like healthcare system, doctors, nurses, et cetera, are a large group of caregivers, whether that's family members, pharmacists, community health workers, like here in our country, globally. And I think AI has the opportunity to help us upskill people for specific skills or tasks that they could help with. And I think that is probably our solution to like global health, is using AI to upskill those people, whether it's here in our country, in rural America. I was meeting with the GOP Doctors Caucus recently, and we were so incredibly aligned about needing to get help to the small rural hospitals in Mississippi and Tennessee to be able to have them capture more patients. And they're absolutely interested in using technology. We have to watch for privacy. We have to think about infrastructure. We have to think about how easy can we make it? Like 3G works. 3G still exists and it works, right? So how do we do it? But I think that the middle portion of community hospitals, of community health workers, that's an area where if we could use some AI, it would be lower risk and really high value. And so that's kind of an area that I'm focused on too.
Yeah, I can see why finding ways to really bring more people into kind of a more inclusive healthcare system by helping them understand the data that they can provide that gives them better patient outcomes would be hugely impactful. There's, I touched on the privacy side, like the HIPAA side a little bit. What about on the maybe more diagnostic side, or just like the FDA? You work with the FDA. How do you think about balancing the regulatory requirements in terms of keeping patients safe with the need to move quickly on AI innovation to deliver the types of outcomes you're talking about?
Yeah. People look to regulation for safety. And I think there's different forms of safety. Is a technology, whether it's a device or software as a medical device, right, AI, does it do what it said it would? And does it not do bad things that we didn't expect it to? And that's FDA approval right there, right? And so there is so much else about safety beyond that falls outside of the scope of FDA, but actually doesn't fall particularly with any one body. So we had a really great meeting earlier this week that included FDA, CMS, some nonprofits in the tech space. Anthropic was there. And we had a whole lot of people talking about how do we work together to understand what safety looks like beyond that kind of base level once you get an approval. By the way, most things get approved at the FDA in the cardiovascular digital health space, end up sitting on a shelf in 3 years. They don't actually end up in people's homes because there's not an infrastructure. And so what I would say is, yes, you're looking for regulation, but really I think what people are looking for is an infrastructure with guardrails. And we don't have the infrastructure. And so we have people starting to build guardrails and they're just floating everywhere. And you're like, but wait, what road is this guardrail going on? And so we're at the point now where I think there are enough governmental bodies, nonprofits, industry partners working together to say, hey, we need an infrastructure for software as a medical device and AI to be able to come through the FDA. And we should start to at least suggest what it is, recognizing that at the end of the day, clinicians and health systems will likely be the ones who build these or get help to build these. Maybe some industry partners will build them in and then bake them into cost. And again, you have to be careful with cost. How much are you baking in? Can people afford the thing now that it's so safe? And so we have to think about it. At the end of the day, from the FDA's perspective, we will continue to, software as a medical device is one of the most rapidly growing, but also rapidly turned around areas of the FDA. People don't realize it. We have picked up the speed with which we can review things because we know the speed at which they're coming in. But just getting FDA approval is so far away from being implemented and being scaled. And the safety and the regulation for implementation and scale, there's not a clear home for who's responsible for that right now. And a lot of clinicians and health systems fear that it's just them, right? The legal side and tort reform. And so we have to keep working together as a system to make that happen.
And do you think that startups that are providing these innovations or even large companies, I would imagine startups probably do this more than the established companies, do they underestimate what implementation looks like? Are they too focused on the FDA approval and not enough on how to actually make it successful after that gets approved?
We have a program called the TAP program for breakthrough devices at the FDA, where myself and one of our chief medical officers will meet regularly with cardiac companies. And one of the first things we do when we work with them, and there are a lot of consulting companies that I've met who do this too, say at the same time you think about FDA approval, think about how you're going to implement. And really, you have to start thinking about market segmentation. Who are you going after? How? And one of the most common problems or mistakes, perhaps, that startups make is they talk to one person. In my case, let's say one cardiologist. And they assume that that cardiologist's workflow or thoughts is going to enable them to better understand. And once you get into healthcare, you understand the complexity of even how different people practice. And that's why I love being at a society now. I loved being at Mass General Hospital. I love being at the society because I really get to now see what are all the different ways in people's practice styles, implementation likelihood, and then how can you help a company best design themselves for success by picking a few of those markets, understanding which ones overlap, right? Doing some kind of node and cluster work and saying, hey, this would be the set. And then go after that. And it's a lot to ask a startup to understand the depth of that level of complexity of care delivery. I've been doing this for 25 years, and maybe I think I'm getting it some of the time now. And so, I think that's important for a startup to realize, talking to one person. Now, it's hard to talk to a lot of people. You don't have the money, time, bandwidth, people, or the baseline knowledge to even understand what they're really saying. And so I think that's where some of these either consulting gigs or accelerators or society partnerships come in handy for these startups to be able to better understand what they're walking into. If you tell them what they're walking into, their technical expertise is great. And so we can all help each other be better.
Yeah. Do you think that there is, maybe past the FDA question, is there too much focus on the technical accuracy of the tool, like the diagnostic tool or the wearable or whatever it might be, and really just not enough attention paid on that rollout? Because it sounds almost, hearing you talk about it, it's almost like business 101 in terms of understanding your markets, doing customer
Yeah,
development.
it really
Obviously,
is.
there's the added complexity of the fact that it's a healthcare system and this is care delivery. But is that, is that a fair kind of characterization? Like they need to focus past that and think about really like in the details.
Yeah. It's fair, and then I will say it's unfair to them, two ways. So one is, yes, that is a correct characterization. But the second is when these companies are kind of coming to market and trying to build what they're doing, I think we need the clinical side of the house to be a lot more willing to iterate with them, even when we first deploy. And so I think it's really important that you have an agile team. If you're going to go heavy on something, like first of all, you need a good founder, like somebody who really believes in it and like understands what they're doing. Fine. But in your team, the people who are going to iterate on your technology when it goes into deployment, right, that's the most important. And so people who find themselves a little short on team members to be able to rapidly iterate, they're the ones who end up running, they run out of cash because it's just taking too long to make the point. So I think that's one thing is like, we're going to ask for iteration. The ones who are all in will ask for iteration on the clinical side. Your startup team needs to be a deep enough bench to be able to do that for the number of customers you're holding. Now, the other side is evidence. You can get to the FDA without randomized controlled trials. There are a large number of clinicians who say, if you're going to affect outcomes, we expect to see a randomized clinical trial. And my answer to that is by the 5 years it takes to do your RCT, this algorithm may be obsolete or it will be changing along the way. Now, somebody argued back with me yesterday, and they said, well, does it really matter? At least it's better than what they were doing before. So let them complete their randomized control trial with this version of AI. They don't always have to be the top version. And I thought that was a good pushback. So I'll give that person credit and I'll say that out loud. But I think real world evidence is a really promising area when we're moving so fast with AI, especially in the lower risk categories. Again, we have to risk stratify. You're not going to take somebody at risk of dying and then play with an AI, right? But if you're in that diagnostic screening, early management phase of a population that could be significant, the company should be ready to iterate. And I think we need to then think from a clinical side about, can we use real world evidence and show that when we put it in place, we learned these things? Can we create a synthetic data set and test on that and feel comfortable enough to roll out a little bit bigger now? Those things, we need to get used to that. And we need to move away from only RCTs, especially in low risk, large population value disease.
That was actually where my mind was going straight away, was in terms of synthetic data sets, because I know that that's something where people feel there is a lot of promise in this space. How do you advise companies deal with that? It sounds like you're recommending it to some extent. Are there some risks associated with it that they should be aware of?
Yeah, I think creating your own synthetic data set is questionable depending on where you're getting your data from. I think there are large companies that already exist that have healthcare data that are likely in the process of, creating synthetic data sets that you can go test on. I think that's important. There are a lot of places that have what we call sandboxes globally. The European countries do a lot of this. They also have a lot more socialized medicine where they have, a sandbox and then companies come in and try. At the ACC, we have the National Cardiovascular Data Registries, NCDR. It's the largest cardiovascular data registry in the world. And so we are definitely working with our data to clean it up, make sure it's safe, make sure that, privacy is maintained, de-identify data, but then also say, can we create synthetic data sets that help cardiovascular companies understand? Can I diagnose earlier? Can I screen? Can I get a sense of risk prediction, either for complications or outcomes? So I think we have to move in that direction. I'll tell a quick story. A woman came to me 2 weeks ago. She's a primary care doc, and her child had congenital heart disease. It was one of the more common ones. It was a hole in the heart, and it needed to be done. And she said, Dr. Bhatt, I went and I asked them, for all the data that was at the hospital that she had gone to, or even just in societies. Why can't I ask anybody for my kid who's 9 years old with this hole in the heart? What do the outcomes look like? What are the best things? Like, why can't I find that? Doesn't anybody know? And the answer is we have all the data, but we don't know because we haven't set up the infrastructure to start pulling that data out. So now that's not synthetic data. That's just saying, hey, if you're going to go to a bank and invest your money with a private somebody, right? You know how they perform. You know how each of their little portfolios performs, right? They have all of this compared to somebody else, right? We don't do that in medicine. Partly it's a style thing. Your doctor decides what's best for you. It turns out nowadays your doctor can decide what's best for you, but your doctor will do better if they have all of this data behind them, telling them things. And then comes the context, the nuance, the edge, right? And we're on top of that. And so I think those platforms are coming. It's mandatory. We have to do that. And we have to be able to say, if you're this kind of a person with this thing, here's what the numbers look like. Here's the best options for you. And we should be able to do that in the next several years.
And it sounds like, so the best path forward for that is third-party kind of credible institutions that are building those data sets that are then opening them up to private companies so that they can do that testing. Like, we don't want private companies building synthetic data sets and running their own tests on that because we don't have any visibility into what's going on.
We don't have visibility into why they're doing it. And there's so much data that already exists that we need to learn to use it. Now, I will say, a lot of my patients say, even if it's de-identified, is it really de-identified? How are you taking my data? Are you taking my data and making money off of it? And I say to them, those are all really valid questions. And I kind of feel the same way every day. So we're at that juncture in every field, not just medicine. It feels a little more personal when it's your healthcare data, though, right? And so I think it's probably more scary when it's your fiscal data. Let's be honest, right? Like, that probably is more of the opportunity to ruin your life acutely if your fiscal data is out there and de-identified rather than, right? Or if your personal numbers are out there rather than your healthcare, because healthcare is really more longitudinal. But again, I do think using existing really good data sets, working with the companies or the people who have them, and starting to see what can we create. I think that's the natural next step in that ladder.
And I think you've hinted at it over some of the last few answers that you've given, but based on your work with the society, seeing a broader set of institutions and doctors working, what are some of the things that you see as going well with the healthcare system, not going so well, and where AI can potentially have the most transformative effect?
Let's go in 3 different ways. One is, right now, AI is making things a little bit easier. Administratively, back office, front office, clinicians, it is making things easier. It's making it easier to get some basic knowledge, right? So to educate people. It's making it easier to get paperwork done, right? So all of those things, but it's making it easier to type less and talk more. That's going great. It will continue to grow. The awesome thing in the more distant future is I can't wait for a foundation model that is entirely based in cardiology. The day that I can look at my patient and say, hey, I know you're supposed to be on 17 meds because the average person over age 60 has at least 2, if not 3 chronic diseases, and oftentimes 2 are cardiac. I know you're not going to take 17 meds. And until poly pills with 17 meds are popular, which, who knows, will we get there first or we'll get to AI first. But could I have a shared decision-making conversation with you? Hey, Ben, your diabetes is really going to drive your morbidity and mortality more so than your blank. Why don't we start by layering on these diabetes meds for you? Or, hey, in other people who look like you, Ben, this is the best thing for us to do for your knee procedure, right? That's that holy grail. It is the thing I'm most excited about. It is still far away. In between is doing smart things for healthcare. So I'm going to try and sell you and our audience on the thing I've been trying to sell companies for a while, which is this concept. Imaging was where we started, not even generative AI. Imaging was where we started, and we have machine learning. And so as I'm sitting here today, I have 10 CAT scans to read, and they're ready for me. I'm going to read them in order of where they came. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It turns out that the AI has already read all 10. It did not take very long. It's prepped them for me, and it also knows that number 7 is the most dangerous on my list. All we have to do is find people that are willing to create the infrastructure to make number 7 number 1 on my list. and then make number 5 number 2. And now I am seeing the next most dangerous case happening in the hospital real time today. And it's constantly moving underneath me. And then I am calling up to the floor and saying, hey, you have a patient with this thing. And so I feel great about my profession now. I'm no longer feeling burnt out. I'm feeling, like I'm doing meaningful work. The computer is doing something that's really quite easy for it, but now it's being used in a very helpful way. And by the way, over on the other side, my friend eating the munchkins and having the donut, she's got all the normal CAT scans today. So she just gets to go normal, confirm normal, and we get patients out of the hospital first thing in the morning. We unleash the ED and let them send patients upstairs, right? And so those are the kind of things that can happen now. And we need people to push for the systems that make it happen and figure out how to convince people of the fiscal revenue. Because at the end of the day, right now, still, no matter how much we're driving towards outcomes, we run on a nearly non-existent margin for healthcare in the United States. And that's the United States, right? So we have to have some fiscal outcome that's also helping push the healthcare outcome, unfortunately. It's just the truth. And so I think those are the kind of things in the middle that I want people to focus on. Yes, administrative, awesome. You can do it, Gen AI. Yes, future cardiology foundation model, long time away, a little bit scary, right? And in the middle is the technology exists, find really smart ways to use it and make a difference. And that's where I think the most promise lies.
Yeah, it's funny, again, hearing you talk through that, because the overlap with so many other industries is so clear, in the sense that so much of the value exists in triage and then finding what the right moment for that human in the loop is, and ultimately making the human in the loop as effective as possible.
That's right.
And I can see in healthcare, obviously, that has very real outcomes. It's not like a customer service ticket for getting a refund. It's like you're going to see the patient that is most urgently in need of care first. And I think that's a great future to aim for. I could talk to you about this for a long time. I'd love to get into our just very quick lightning round as we wrap up. What's the AI tool that you personally use the most in your clinical or administrative work?
I have to admit, I try a lot of things, Gemini, Cloud, et cetera. The latest ChatGPT, it knows me well. It knows when I'm talking about Lego robotics for my 7th grader. It knows when I'm thinking chief innovation officer wise. So there you have it. I'm there.
Yeah, the memory function has definitely helped it.
Yeah.
What's your go-to resource for staying on top of AI innovation and healthcare policy?
Yeah, I may be different than others, or maybe similar to some. It's people. I spend all the time I can talking to the people who are on the kind of cutting edge of doing this work, who are as confused as with their day job as I am sometimes, because I think it's moving too fast to wait for people to just publish and then read what it was. And so meeting with people, talking to them about what they're working on has been really revolutionary for my job.
Yeah, always good to go to the source. What's a phrase or concept about AI and medicine that shifted how you think about the field that you've recently heard?
Now we're going to throw humility out the window for a second. My teenage daughters can mock me later. It's my own phrase. And I came up with it back in 2013 when I first started using telemedicine against like everybody's advice, because my patients wanted to FaceTime me. And I was like, guys, I'm going to get arrested. Like, we cannot FaceTime about your healthcare, okay? And so we were trying to figure out what to do. And I got a license, and I was the only one doing kind of telemedicine in cardiology. And the phrase that I used then was based on the fact that my patients I would thought would leave me. So it's desperation is the mother of adoption. And I think we've come full circle. I think today, the compute power of the human brain is not enough to deliver the best healthcare in the complex systems we have. We need the compute power of AI. So desperation is the mother of adoption.
I love that. A good pairing with necessity is the mother of invention.
That's right.
That's all we have time for today. Ami, if people want to follow your work and learn more about what you're up to, where should they go?
Probably my LinkedIn is the best place right now. I spend most of my time in the office caring for patients, so I haven't built anything else out. Eventually, Dr. Ami Bhatt, maybe .com will be something like that. But I'll update you later, Ben, when I get around to that. In the meantime, the daily work continues, and find me on LinkedIn. And I would love to chat with people.
That's great. So that was Dr. Ami Bhatt, who is Chief Innovation Officer at the American College of Cardiology. Ami, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking time away from your patients for a little bit to talk to me. I really appreciated it, and I learned a lot.
Ben, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.